Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, but there's no actual coffee. Each episode, we interviewed an expert in the field of law enforcement analysis to share their career-defining stories and to get their insights on the world. Please join us on recognizing and learning from these brilliant minds as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 23 years of law enforcement analysis experience. She has trained thousands upon thousands in the area of crime analysis and intelligence analysis. She's been a keynote speaker and a presenter on many occasions. She's one of the first analysts to be certified under IACA's certification program. And just for fun, she got her doctorate of psychology from the University of the Rockies. She is one of Colorado's best. Please welcome Sally Rawlings. Sally, how are we doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, Jason?
I am doing well. There's so much I want to get into with you with this episode. You as an analyst and you as an instructor. To start, you've spent all of your career in Colorado at various stops, Longmont PD, Weld County Sheriff's Office, and even Bloomsfield PD. Just give us a brief overview of some of the tasks that you've done at those different places and how you developed your specialties.
Okay, sure. I actually started out with the desire to be like a district attorney and go to law school. So I did a pre-law bachelor's degree, which required me to do an internship. And I had a friend of a friend that's like, hey, Longmont PD needs an intern. And so I said, okay, fine, whatever. And I signed up to be an intern for their crime analyst. And at that time, I had no idea what that meant.
Sure.
So their analyst, Jennifer Christman, kind of took me under her wing and taught me everything she knew. She's amazing. She works for the FBI now, which maybe that's supposed to be secret. But,
Not now.
So after several months there, I said, this is what I want to do. So they actually hired me on as a part-time analyst to stay on and help with the project. So about 3 years later is when Weld County Sheriff had their first opening for an analyst. They'd never had one before. I went and interviewed and showed them some of the things that I had done at the police department. And they said on the spot, you're hired, because nobody else even knows what crime analysis is. So in about 2000, I started the unit there. Oh my gosh, it was the old school way of paper maps on the wall and printed out police reports. But I really enjoyed my time there. And so I left there in about 2008. But in the meantime, I had started teaching for CMAP, which is the Crime Mapping and Analysis Program, which was run by the University of Denver and overseen by the National Institute of Justice. So while doing that, I met both Noah Fritz and Sean Baer and Dan Helms. And we really got along great, and they asked me to go teach at CMAP. So I was doing both sheriff's office and CMAP teaching. On the side, I had teaching for IACA, and finally my sheriff, he's a senator now. He's a great guy, John Cook, said, Sal, you got to do one or the other, girl, because you can't be gone every other week. So I resigned in 2008 and went to be the lead instructor for what is Bear Analytics, now LexisNexis. So for about 6 years, I traveled and taught at various police departments. About every other week. I went to over 130 police departments to provide training. But then the time that I was home, I did data extractions remotely for police departments from their RMS into a database that they could use for analysis. I wrote a few articles for the Police Foundation, taught for Police Technical, of course IACA, went on to get my master's in criminal justice, and then started my own company called NOCO Analytics, which is Northern Colorado. And then I decided, yes, I guess I need to have my doctorate. I don't know why. I think it was more just about the knowledge than the actual degree, because it doesn't necessarily get you more money if you want to be in teaching or law enforcement. And then in 2014, along came my son, and I said, I can't travel anymore. So I went back to an analyst job at Broomfield Police, and that was 2014. I'm now currently at Jefferson County Sheriff.
Very good. Wow. So that was a nice little overview. Just some follow-up questions on that. So when you went from Longmont to the sheriff's office, what's, from your perspective, the difference between a police department and sheriff's office?
They are vastly different. And to be perfectly honest, when I went to the sheriff's office, I didn't really know what that meant. And I've encountered a lot of people now that are like, well, what's the difference? Obviously, a sheriff's office takes care of the policing for unincorporated portions of the county. So there's the city limits, and the PD takes care of people inside the city limits. The sheriff's office takes care of everybody outside the city limits. So Weld County Sheriff's Office actually encompassed over 4,000 square miles, which is a completely different thing than saying, oh, this park has a lot of graffiti happening. It's no, 2 people just got murdered an hour and a half away. So very different types of crime, different ways of dealing with it, a lot more about the geography because we have major highways that run through the county. Very, very different. But I'm glad to have had experience in both because like with the sheriff's office, it's a lot of burglaries because people live out in the middle of nowhere and their house, their barn, their whatever, things are taken. But in a city, it's robberies and your car's stolen and just very different types of crime. So luckily at Broomfield, they're a city and county, so they have both. So they have the courts and the jail and the police and everything there together. So I think that experience helped me at Broomfield to learn about both sides.
So when you get to the sheriff's office, you had mentioned that you're the first analyst ever to be hired, and paper maps, paper reports, and just describe a little bit what the first year or two was like for you.
There was a big learning curve, both for myself and for the sheriff's office, because they didn't know what I was supposed to do. I didn't know what they needed. I spent some time going around and doing little interviews with people like, what would be helpful to you? What would not be helpful? You know, what would make your job easier? And one of the tricks that I learned from Steve Gottlieb years ago was if you want to know if people are looking at your bulletins, print them on different colored paper, then walk around and look in the trash cans. And so I did do that. And I found that a lot of what I was producing was just busy work and mundane and nobody cared. Yeah, it really taught me to learn what's actionable out of crime analysis and what is just busy work. And there's a big, huge difference. Just doing busy work for the sake of doing it is pretty much worthless. For the first several years at the sheriff's office, all the detectives took me with them to crime scenes. Like one time I was at a state patrol meeting about auto theft with a detective who's actually now the current sheriff. And we got a call from the office saying, we need you at, we called it the Hex tree because lots of bad things happen at this tree. So we're like, okay. And we went there and there was a homicide and we were just uncovering the body. And they wanted me there from the very beginning until the very end. So that was invaluable experience, not something that every analyst necessarily gets to do, but we learned together. So through developing programs and ComStat type meetings, they evolved and we learned together. So by the time I left, I felt like the position was really well formed.
By the time you left, were you still just the sole analyst?
I was the only analyst, but the biggest thing that changed is when I got hired there in 2000, they didn't know, like I said, what an analyst is. So they paid me the same as animal control and I made $13 an hour. Mm-hmm. So I had to go to the county commissioners on 2 separate occasions with the argument that this is a professional position and this salary needs to be raised. And by the time I left, it was $30 an hour.
That's impressive. And I good for you for doing that and being proactive and going to and making the change. Whoever is in that position now, I mean, that's you set up every analyst at that position forever by doing that. So good for you for doing that. You go into teaching full time, and we'll get into the teaching aspect in a little bit later. I want to just stay with analysis for right now. So then you come back from teaching for a couple of years and then back to Bloomfield. So what kind, is it Bloomfield?
Broomfield.
Bloomfield, sorry. What had changed from your time off? So you weren't totally out of sight, out of mind with analysis, but in terms of getting back into analysis, what did you find?
Right. Well, during the time I was teaching and going to different PDs, part of what I did was I was like, show me some crime series you have going on and we're going to work through it together. And I kept finding myself saying, just give it to me. I'll just do it. Because I really missed the hands-on analysis and finding the bad guy. So when I started at Broomfield, I was also their first analyst, which was a bit shocking. But again, they didn't quite know how to take me. Here I tried to hit the ground running and they were like, okay. So I feel like I integrated well, but they didn't know. They're like, what can you help us with? And I'm like, I can help you with whatever you want. So whether it be in the crime lab, or whether it be with extracting police reports. So what we finally agreed upon, the chief's goal was that I would be 50-50 between helping patrol and helping detectives on cases. So we finally found a good balance. We implemented a new internal intranet that put all of the bulletins out to the police cars. We had a new crime meeting. And crime meetings like CompStat, we all know, you have to do them exactly right for it to work. We implemented one that was purely for the sake of having patrol and detectives speak to each other because they were so isolated previously. And that really brought the two together. So I absolutely loved working there. It was a great police department.
So would you say that what you did for patrol was more crime analysis and what you did for the detectives was more intelligence analysis, or is that incorrect?
Yes, no, that's definitely correct. And I would get requests from patrol commanders saying, can you tell us, is there something going on in, this neighborhood right now? Is there cars being broken into over here? And then of course, detectives are like, tell me who did this. Who are they related to? How does this case link out into other Denver area cases? So yeah, very different, which is why the chief said, try to do both. So you just have to kind of look at what you have on your plate and decide which one you're going to do first, whichever is the most pressing. In addition to that, though, the chief had me go to the weekly command staff meeting, which is just all command staff and the chief, and give them an update. What is happening in our city? And I would say, this is very unusual. Our mall has had 27 cars stolen. That's not the norm. Just to kind of keep them up to date so they could go back to their patrol officers and tell them what's going on.
Yeah, so I had Steve French from the UK on last week, and we got to talking about the difference between intelligence analysis and crime analysis, because outside the US, they don't see the difference between the two. Where do you stand on the idea? Because in the US, it seems like there's a clear distinction between crime analysis and intelligence analysis.
Yeah, I do believe there's a very clear distinction, because crime analysis, as it was intended by its founding fathers, is looking at the crime happening right now. It's very tactical. Of course, there's other types of crime analysis, but it's what is happening on the streets and what are we going to do to mitigate that? How do we allocate resources to be in the right time, right place, looking for what's going on? Where intelligence analysis is like one case and what happened and what are we going to do about it, and working backwards. Like, we already know who committed this, but what are we going to do about them and what else have they done? So while I think that most analysts end up doing both, especially if you are an only analyst at a police department or sheriff's office, they are very different types of subject material.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective. I think I agree with you. There are two very distinct tasks. So it's understandable that because you're asking different types of questions that you're going to get different perspectives. So let's get into your badge story. And I just looking for a story. And I know this was hard for you to probably pick because you have presented so many times and I've sat in on your presentations and you are just a great storyteller. And I gave you what is the career defining moment for you, and you've worked on so many cases, but I also kind of challenge you as like, if there's one out there, a story you want to tell that you haven't told before in a presentation, that might be a good one to tell for the podcast. So I know this is a particular one that you haven't told anybody, so I'm pretty excited to get the exclusive. So what is your badge story?
So yeah, we being me and law enforcement have had a lot of experiences on major cases, major patterns and series and trends. But this particular case comes to mind because it was fascinating and the way it turned out was just awesome. So this was in 2017. Basically how it began is that our patrol officers were running plates in a parking lot that we know is pretty famous for having stolen cars in it, and they found a stolen plate. There were two people sleeping in the car. It was a Mercedes SUV. So they snuck up, ran the VIN, because as we all know, most people, when you steal a car, you also steal a plate to put on it. They ran the VIN and the vehicle was stolen. So that's the point where guns are drawn, pull the people out of the car. It was a male and female, so I'm calling it Bonnie and Clyde. The female was very pregnant. I want to say about 8 months pregnant. They were both high on heroin. It was clear that the car was loaded with stolen property. So we took them into custody and, usually are like, okay, people in a stolen car probably have some stolen stuff. So when we started going through the vehicle, we towed it and started going through the property. We found a gun inside, a stolen gun. And we start thinking, okay, these two have been up to more than just, breaking into cars or stealing mail. So what we did is we hauled all the property into our crime lab, which is downstairs. And so myself and the detectives and the CSIs all have our laptops up, and we have all the property on the table, and we started a shared Google Sheet. And this became routine for us, that you have a pile of 100 items, I have a pile, and you start entering, what is it? Does it have any identification, like a personal number, VIN number, or a name, or something like that? Do we know what agency reported it stolen? All that. And so all of us are entering into this Google Sheet at the same time. Now we have a database in Colorado, and I think it's expanding beyond Colorado, but it's called Lumen. And this is something that I think law enforcement and crime analysis has needed forever, which is every single PD dumps their data into one place, so that it's not like, oh, I have to get on the phone and call Denver PD and say, hey, have you had shoes stolen? It's all in the same exact place. So we started doing searches in that database for all of this recovered property. So we're looking at the VIN of the vehicle, and I realized it had been stolen out of Arapahoe County. Now, one of my really good friends, Danelle Josio, she's the analyst for Arapahoe. I texted her, I'm like, we recovered your stolen Mercedes. And she texts back, okay, what about the other one? So what are you talking about? She said, we're missing a BMW, and they were stolen by the same people. We have them on video. I'm like, ow. So we worked through as much of the property as we could. We had even just keys. We had business cards, just random things. Somehow I got a hold of the guy where the keys were stolen. He's like, yeah, they burglarized my house. And while they're at it, they took all my keys. Take a picture of the keys, sent it to him. And he's like, that's mine, because he recognized the keychain. It was just really starting to explode. So in addition to going through all the property and building the cases, I started monitoring the jail phone calls and the video visits. So for us, you can do a video visit from your phone. If you're on the outside, you can be on your phone talking to somebody on the inside. You could be on a laptop, you could be on anything. So we just I sit and watch them all and listen to the calls and see what they're talking about. So the female asked her mother-in-law, well, they're not married, but her boyfriend's mom, on the phone, she said, you need to get rid of what's in the shed before the cops find it. So I immediately stand up and I yell across the room to the detective, Joe, we got to find a shed. He says, well, where's the shed? I said, I don't know. She mentioned the airport, so we assume she means DIA, Denver's airport. So we get in the car. He and I get in the car with another detective, and we start driving towards the airport. And anytime we saw a shed, we'd kind of peek inside. Somebody's sleeping. We're like, sorry, dude, we'll just keep going. So I said, okay, we need to figure out where this mother-in-law lives. So we used property records, social media, everything you can manage, and found where the mom lives from her parcel data. She had been remarried, didn't have the same last name, but we found an address for her. So we go knock on the door. She's already raising their existing child and soon to be raising the one she's pregnant with. And we said, look, if you want to keep custody of this kid, you're going to tell us about this shed. And she said, okay, it's down that road. It's on the right. It's red. So we drive down this road, we see a shed on the right, and we pull up to the shed. Now, it's kind of like a freestanding garage, and the garage door has a small hole in it. So we walked up to the hole, turned on our cell phone lights and looked in, and there was a BMW inside. So I'm like, yes, we found the BMW. Well, it turns out that it was not the BMW she was worried about. So we towed the BMW, we look inside, and what was in there was she was making money. And so she was actually washing bills. She had like Ziploc bags of money in some sort of chemical, washing and making bills. She had bills that she had printed. She had the printer. Obviously, this is a federal offense. So now we're like,
counterfeiting.
Yes, it was getting deeper and deeper. What we learned, these two had been in a 9-day manhunt with the U.S. Marshals looking for them. Over the course of 3 states, 9 days, they had been on a crime rampage. They had stolen a truck from the railroad, which is a big deal because the railroad's federal as well. They had been in a shootout in Wyoming where they were shooting at one of the deputies that was trying to catch them. It blew up. So we used their phone records, started link charts, interviewing associates. The detective would have somebody in the interrogation room, and I'd be texting them questions like, where did you get this? Where did you get that? Who stole it? Who gave you the ride? In the meantime, I'm in the back room running it through databases, contacting people saying, is this the truth? in the end, we decided to seek an indictment through the Attorney General's Office of Colorado. So that's where you take your information, your proof that you have, and you take it to a grand jury and say, do you think that we can charge these people? Well, in Colorado, there's a law that's called COCA, which is the Colorado Organized Crime Control Act. It's meant to come down on people that are working as a team throughout the state in more than one jurisdiction. If you are able to be charged with COCA, it carries the same weight as attempted murder. So even if you have, you might have 90 charges of theft and, the counterfeiting and this and that. But if let's say we dropped all of those, but just stuck with the COCA, you're going to go to prison for a minimum of 18 years. So we did seek COCA. It's like a racketeering thing. We did seek COCA on both of them. We took it to the grand jury. They agreed. Both were convicted. She gave birth in prison. The baby was given back to his mom, and neither of them will see that child until it's at least 18 years old, which I think is great for the child. But the moral of the story was you have to get creative, finding addresses, looking at pawn slips, every possible avenue to try to figure out what exactly has happened. You need to work as a team, especially with detectives, and that there's definitely no case that is too big. Now, it took us a good year to work through this, but we worked hard and we worked as a team, and they're in prison. We had probably 4 or 5 of those cases in 4 years where they were charged with upwards of 100 charges and then received the COCA.
Okay. So you mentioned different jurisdictions. Did it only stay in Colorado then, or were there federal charges that came about with this couple and other states?
Yes, we decided to do Colorado by itself because of the COCA charge, but they are also being charged federally, and they have charges in both Wyoming and Nebraska. So basically, when they're done doing their time here, they'll go answer and do more time for the other people. The railroad investigators, I had never worked with the railroad before, but they're serious. They're like, don't mess with the railroad. So I'm guessing they're going to get a lot of time for the railroad crimes as well.
That's interesting how that simple arrest kind of led to something way bigger, because it's like no traffic stop is routine kind of thing. You kind of never know who you're going to pull over. Well, this case comes across your desk and you probably had no idea that it was going to consume a year's worth of your life and work. So good job on that.
Thank you.
I often hear from analysts just getting that kind of buy-in, or maybe even a trust is a word that you could use, where like, okay, other analysts at the department can be a team member like you were, doing all this various stuff, even getting to the point where you're part of the interrogation or part of other aspects. You mentioned like the crime lab. What's your advice to them of trying to get these analysts to be more part of the team, I'll use for lack of better terminology?
What I have definitely figured out is that you have to provide the people around you something actionable, not just something pretty. Like, let's say a detective says, oh, can you map out the burglaries? Well, we already know where they happened, but let me tell you when they happened. And is there anything about the series that you don't already know? So if you hand them actionable information, like, the shed's a bad example, but we need to, work on this, and then something comes out of it. Let's say, like my mall example, we're having several robberies at the mall. Well, if you can identify, this is who I think this might be, and they're doing it every Thursday. So let's put out extra patrol, and then something happens, they make an arrest, that gets you the buy-in. If you provide a detective, look, I've been looking at this person's Facebook, and this is who they're associating with. Did you know that he's a gang member? Blah, blah, blah. It's something that they have to be able to work on and have something come out of it. So if you're just shoving bulletins out the door and making crime maps that nobody cares about, they're going to quit listening. But as soon as you give them information they didn't already have, then you get that buy-in.
So how did you keep it all together in terms of this investigation? Because there was a lot to this. You mentioned using Google Drive with all this documentation with all the different property, and you're traveling with a detective here or there, and you have all this different evidence, telephone tolls, the telephone records. How did you keep it all together?
Well, that was one task that they asked of me when I started there, was if we have a major case, whether it be a homicide or something like this, where they're just, crime spree across 3 states, help us keep track of it. So we have done two things. One is we have used Google everything, which, because my agency, quote unquote, went Google, which means they tried to do away with Microsoft, which I said, absolutely not, I need to keep mine. But they put a huge emphasis on using Google products. The other was using OneNote. So as people said, here's crime scene photos, put them in there. Here's all the evidence, put it in there. Here's our schedule for interviews, put it in there. So I would organize it and put it all in a central location, like, hey, did you know that you have an interview tomorrow at 3 with Westminster PD and this and that, and you need to be at the jail, and making notes constantly in there and trying to keep it organized for them. Because prior to that, everybody's kind of working their own thing. So that's why being part of the team, working together, being very organized, keeping everything in one place is absolutely vital. And we've done that for homicides. Meet with the DA and he says, okay, this is what I need from you. And you just start handing out tasks, like the lead detective says, okay, we have to do interviews, we have to do crime scene, we have to do this. And as the analyst, you can help pull that all together with whatever technology you choose, whether it be like OneNote or Google, and keep it very organized for them. So then when you present it back, either to the DA or a grand jury, it's very easy to understand. One of the things that I've had to do several times for the grand jury, for the AG's office, is a presentation, because of what they want to be able to do. The AG wants to go to the grand jury and walk them through the case in a way that makes sense. So I would help prepare like a PowerPoint with crime scene photos, with mug shots, with this vehicle was taken on this date, chronologically, to just take something very complex and make it very easy to understand.
Quick follow-up, using Google, was there any pushback or any concern about security?
I was shocked. I was shocked that they did that. It was a city decision, not a police department decision. So we rolled with it. Like I said, I demanded on keeping my own Microsoft stuff. I'm a huge Microsoft Access fan, and there's just no way you can get your job done without that. So yeah, I don't know if it was a financial saver because Google does everything, but it really doesn't. Their sheets and stuff don't do all the same that Microsoft does.
You mentioned keeping everything in one location. I think that's a huge battle. Just trying to have everything in location, having to make it searchable without doing a ton of data entry. But it sounds like that's it seems like there was a lot of data entry. Is that the case?
There is, because especially when it comes to a lot of property. I mean, you have a carload full of stolen property. You have to get it in the system, both for property and evidence has to do their own. So that it goes into the RMS, but you have to have it for yourself and the detectives to say, wait, whose driver's license was it? Or where did we find that keychain? You have to have it shared like that. That is one of the good things about like Google Sheets is if you have a group, everybody can enter data into there. And we even had 2 investigative aides come to work for us, to volunteer for us. And we would say, help us keep this clean, clean up anything that's wrong, because we're going as fast as I can. And so they would have access and they would help us with that too. And it actually worked out pretty well.
Any last words on the badge story? Is there a question that I didn't cover?
No, I think, the sad thing is that today, especially in Colorado, heroin is something that it didn't used to be. But to look at these 2 that had just victimized hundreds of people and had 2 children, to me, I take it personal about the kids and the victims, but you need to make a change in somebody's life. And if putting those 2 in prison makes that change and you're being part of it, that's what your job is all about.
Let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll switch gears a little bit because I do want to spend some time with Sally, the instructor, because I think there's a lot of insight that we can get from there. So we'll get into that when we come back. You're listening to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We'll be right back.
Hey, this is Sean Bear, and I would like to suggest that everybody go learn programming. I think that's the one thing that has carried me through all the different aspects of my life. And if you learn some programming, you'll better understand the application that you use, and who knows, you might even be able to write your own application. Good luck.
Hi, this is Steve French, and I have a message to you about language. Language is really important when you're doing your job. For instance, it isn't a zucchini, it's a courgette. It isn't a lobby, it's a foyer. It isn't Z, it's Z. Buses go on routes, not routes, and it is never, ever made out of aluminum.
Hi, this is Sean Fisher, and at my work, we're known as the Nerdery. and we're proud of it. Embrace who you are.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking with Sally Rawlings, and she was giving us her Bonnie and Clyde version of an investigation that she helped work on and close. Now, I want to spend the next segment talking to Sally about, or talking to you, talk to you actually, talk to you about you as an instructor, because I look at your resume, I look at your contributions to the profession, and yes, you're an analyst, but you've done so much work as an instructor too. It's just like a 50-50 split of like who you are and what you've contributed to the profession. Do you have a preference between crime analysis work and teaching?
What I've learned is that I have an equal love of both, which is why I continue, especially like at IACA conferences, to put in for presenting, because I absolutely love the moment when somebody goes, oh my gosh, I didn't know that, thank you. And it helps them with their own career. I love it. I love people. Obviously, I'm a huge extrovert, as everybody knows. I love people, I love teaching, but I really like the job. I love it.
Yes, your presentations are captivating. And as you were talking in the first segment there, you used some of your funny voices. And I know your face gets animated too. And part of me is like, oh, you can't. I know she's doing one of her animated faces with the weird voices that you can't say. You just have to picture it. Yeah. But let's talk about a little bit about NOCO analytics.
Okay.
You created it, you're still doing it. Just how did it come to be, and what's the goal?
Really, what I decided was that I wanted the ability to, and it's an LLC, it's fairly simple, but I wanted the ability for when somebody contacts me, which like happened last week, somebody said, do you still teach those? If I want to go teach a course, I have the company umbrella to teach under. I would say, the company's great, but I teach equally for other entities as well. If IACA asks me to teach, absolutely. If Police Foundation says we need help with this, absolutely. So it's a way to do teaching on your own. I'm not a business person. I would give everything away for free if I could. So it's really just a method by which to do more teaching.
So what are the topics that are normally you're asked to teach?
So I have taught everything from specific software applications, like when I worked for Bear Analytics, obviously we had our own few programs, including Attack Workstation, which is still my favorite, even though I'm old, so I still use it daily. To online programs, I've taught ArcGIS for years and years, and how to not just use it, because it's a huge program, right? But how to use it for law enforcement, because every little job or career path has its niche inside of ARC. So how do you use it for yourself? Also, just a lot of tactical analyst type topics, like you have crime happening, what do you do about it? And that's usually what I would choose to do at the end of a course, is say, look, here's a chunk of data. You have a couple hours to work on it. I want to see what you learned, and you're going to present it back to me like I'm your chief of police, saying, this is what we need to do. Hoping that you can mine the data out, put it into something actionable, and present it back in a way that the officers or whoever say, okay, I got it. So that's really the goal.
Yeah, I like the idea of getting the students involved. I think too much of instruction is the instructor talking, it's a lecture style, and the student is just there to consume.
Right.
And talk about practice makes perfect. Actually doing is learning. And I don't think there's enough of that going around. And I guess that's a nice segue into my next question, because you have your own company that you do teaching for. You mentioned Bear Analytics in the past, and Police Technical, Tiffin University, Police Foundation that you've worked for and taught for in the past. What do you think is the state of law enforcement analysis training in the U.S.?
Well, I agree with what you said about like the lecture. To have a really good instructor like a Sean Bear that helps you understand these topics and gets you involved is what we need more of. I have seen excellent presentations and courses. The key is like you said, having the people involved, is not just sitting there and being talked to. There is more training available now, obviously, than there was 10 and 20 years ago, but it's a very specific type of training that people need. And that's something that we're trying to accomplish with our mentoring committee is, what do you think that you need? And I'm going to help you find the training for that. Like police technical is basically for police, but they've added analysis in there. So it's like, oh, you want to learn PowerPoint? No, it's PowerPoint for police or for analysis. So they offer wonderful courses. Sometimes I just have people say, do you know anything about this? Whether it be how to identify a vehicle or come up with a possible VIN number. And I say, well, I don't know how to do that, but I know who does. Or do you know anything about databases? Sure, I'll come help you with that. But it's not as broad as it probably could be. It's something that I believe in wholeheartedly. At this point, we're still a small world, even though there's thousands of us. And I think we each know who's the expert of what field. So if you say, I need to know about phone toll analysis, I'm like, go talk to Mike Winslow. He does it perfectly. Or I need to know about, Excel. I know who to send you to. If you want to learn about Access, I send you to Jason Elder.
Thank you.
So yeah, I think it could be even better, but we're working on it. We're definitely getting there.
To me, one of the things, especially as a new analyst, everything is new, right?
Yes.
It's just a blank slate, which what I've always encouraged young analysts to do, and I think in the same boat that you've talked about, is you're going to have a return on your investment, right? You're going to have to pick something that you're interested in and study and learn, but you also have to make sure that it's going to be worthwhile and pay dividends at the end. Right? Because if you learn a software like R, for instance, if you start studying R programming language and then you happen to never use that again, yeah, there's going to be silver linings out of there that you can pull out of there, but it might not have been as best choice to learn as opposed to maybe SQL, which can use. It is more readily available and more needed, so to speak. So what would your advice be for those that, maybe have a clean slate? There's multiple directions they can go into. How do they prioritize what to learn first?
One thing that I've tried to mention in any course I teach, whether it be for IACA or not, is that what we have decided as an entity, being IACA and the certification committee, is that we have identified which skill sets are imperative for you to be proficient at, not only to take an exam and become certified, but to do well in your job. So what IACA has done is we went out and said, who's the foremost expert in each of these skills? And we had them contribute a chapter to a book. If you want, you just get the book and take a look at it. The other thing that we've done is we broke it in half. It's 20 skills. So we broke it in half, first 10, second 10, and you can take an online course. And you focus on each of these skills a week at a time. And the purpose is A, to help you prepare if you're trying to take the exam, but B, also to show you what you might need further training in. I teach the second 10 of those. And I've had students say, Sal, I have never made a crime map before. I'm like, okay, then this is what you need to do. This is the training you need to take. Or I don't know how to write Excel equation stuff. Okay, well then you need to go take some Excel courses. And even if it's at your local community college, but it helps you identify what you need to be better at. The other thing that I've always suggested to people is, have you been to a conference? If you haven't, just go. A, because there's amazing trainers there and presentations, but B, you're going to meet the people that are going to tell you what you need to know.
And you're also going to be exposed to the different tools that are out there.
Right.
We have the vendors out there. You're going to learn some of the latest, greatest software and capabilities out there as well.
Yes.
So you mentioned the IACA and even getting into the certification. You talked about the book. The certification process is linked to the book. There's 20 sections to the exam for certification, all tied to the book. Mm-hmm. I guess before I get to that question, though, I had mentioned at the top of introducing you that you're one of the first analysts to be certified under the program. But in talking with you in the prep meeting, it should be the first, right? Well,
Michelle Kennedy would make an argument that we tied. But yeah, Michelle Kennedy from Douglas County and myself took the exam the same day in Washington, D.C. in 2005. It was the first time it was offered, and we both passed. I just was a couple minutes faster.
I'll have to have her on to give a rebuttal.
Yeah.
So, but IACA currently has established a steering committee to improve the certification program. So I guess my question to you is, what are some things you want to see improved with the certification process?
Well, I think that there's some things that I call them students, but they're not. Analysts like that I've had in my course wonder that maybe isn't as explained as it should be. So I had a person take my course and said, well, I thought this was going to be about taking the exam. And it's like, no, this is about the skills for the exam. So I think that needs to be clarified both on the IACA website, and it should be clarified at the conferences when we discuss certification, that these courses are offered to help you with your skills. That clarification would probably help. I think the process, it's evolving. It used to be you can take it, at the conference, because then you're sitting in a room with somebody watching you, to you can take it at your PD as long as you're in a room and somebody's watching you. We could probably take that up a notch for as far as taking the exam, but I think it's done fairly well. We have a lot of people certified now, and it's become quite a goal for people.
Yeah, I think one of the concerns is the fail rate. Some people are uncomfortable with how many people fail the exam.
Right.
And maybe what advice would you have for somebody that's failed the exam?
Well, not to sound like a broken record, but did they take the skill set courses? Because I have had people say, look, I'm trying to get into crime analysis, and I've done analysis of data before, but not crime analysis. I'm like, do you know the court system? Do you know how this works? Because that might be your downfall. So if you just go into the exam thinking, I know this, and then you get questions about what is a state statute, and you're like, I don't know, then you're going to fall flat. So in preparing, I would say take the courses, read the book, and go to the conferences, and you should be just fine.
I think it's interesting because it is a certification, and the whole idea is for you to be a well-rounded analyst, right? And so you had mentioned that, well, I don't ever do mapping, or I never write bulletins or in my current job, but you still should know how to do that if you're going to be a well-rounded analyst.
Right. And I think that knowing the various softwares, how do you make a bulletin? Well, I have had people from my past police department texting me, how do you make a bulletin? Because it's like a detective. Where you should be able to get in, get it done, send it off. It looks professional. Hey, what do I do with this data? Get it in, get it crunched, send it off. So you need to be able to do all of those things and be able to do them well and do them quickly.
And you had mentioned a mentoring program. So you're reading from my script. So you are taking over a mentoring program from me. So I just will ask you, please don't make me look bad.
You're funny.
But I guess just talk briefly in terms of the mentoring program, what you hope to bring to the program.
Yeah, previously I was a mentor and I've had mentees. I think it's an excellent idea. I think that you have put a lot of work into it because it's a big deal. It's a big meatball. But the only things that I saw that I want to change are when you have, well, this is from my perspective, I'm sure mentees feel differently, but I've had mentees that kind of fall off the radar. So I'm going to try to bring something in that keeps them in the loop, or at least attempt. You can't force somebody, you can't, make the horse drink the water, but something to help people keep a little more engaged. Like you might reach out at first and say, well, yeah, I'd love to be a mentee and learn about this stuff. Oh, wait, I have a job. I don't have time for this. So finding a way to incorporate it that keeps them involved is definitely my goal.
And for those listening, hopefully you do know that IACA has a mentoring program, but in case you don't, there is a mentoring program. And if you're interested in being mentored, please go to IACA.net and find the mentoring page, reach out and get assigned a mentor. And at the same time, if you're looking to give back and you have something to teach, been an analyst for 5+ years and you have something to teach somebody that's just starting out, please reach out and become a mentor as well.
Absolutely.
I'm kind of curious in terms of you as an instructor, because I mentioned that, you've been a luncheon speaker at the IACA conference. You've been a keynote speaker at some local association conferences, and you've obviously been just the presenter. Is there one that you prefer, or there a different perspective of each, whether it's a luncheon speaker, a keynote speaker, or just a normal presenter?
I think what makes the difference to me is I prefer to be able to teach what I think people will learn the most from, instead of just like, hey, can you come teach a mapping class? I'm like, sure, and I will do it. But last year, for instance, we had our conference in DC again, and the local sheriff got fairly famous for being outspoken about the red flag law. He said he's not going to enforce it. If somebody says, take this person's gun away, he said, we're not going to do it, which is against state law. And so that's why he became quite well known for it. Well, my leanings are towards criminal psychology, and I've studied a lot about personality disorders and schizophrenia and why people behave the way they do. So what we did together was a presentation about mass shootings and red flag laws. And we looked at what's the actual problem causing these shootings, and is the red flag law the answer? So we kind of piggybacked off each other. But I was so very passionate about that presentation because a lot of law enforcement, not to throw cops under the bus, but they will see somebody commit a horrific act and they will just say, well, he's evil. It's like, well, yeah, he probably should be put away somewhere. However, it might just be a mental health issue. So maybe we could do more proactively about it. We had a horrible, horrible homicide a few years ago where a man killed his 4-year-old nephew with an axe. And so, of course, our police just thought, this guy's horrible. And I'm like, who kills their nephew with an axe? Obviously have mental health issues. So there's more considerations when dealing with mental health problems, both for the offenders and for the victims. So for me, finding something that absolutely is my passion to teach about is my preference, whether it be at any of, lunch or whatever, as long as it's something that I feel very strongly about.
So, and maybe you said it and I just didn't pick it up. What was your conclusion on the red flag law?
Well, the red flag law is in effect in Colorado. Mm-hmm. The problem with the red flag law, one is that it does violate the U.S. Constitution. And that was Steve's biggest argument, is that you have to enforce the Constitution, you have to enforce state statute, you have to enforce your, municipal issues. So which do you choose when one is in conflict with the other? The other thing that we learned is that somebody with mental health issues, you might not know it until something happens. So we had a deputy in Douglas County that was killed a few years ago, and he had first responded to a disturbance where this guy was kind of acting out, making threats. So they talked him down and they said, it's going to be okay. Well, this is 2 officers acting in a mental health role that they shouldn't have to do. So they left the guy in his apartment and they got called back. And at this point, it had escalated where the suspect was videotaping himself on the phone with dispatch saying, I'm going to kill somebody. And yes, I have weapons. So what are you left with? His parents had already taken his weapons and then they were forced to give them back because they're not theirs. They had to give them back. It was the law. So what ended up happening is the deputies say, we have to go in because what if he starts shooting up this apartment complex? And they went in and he killed one of the deputies with a gun through a door. So it's a difficult balancing act. What I really feel is that there needs to be much more emphasis in our country in general on mental health. Issues like schizophrenia don't set in until early adulthood. So what are the signs? That's what the theater shooter's mom said. She goes, if I had known, I would have done something, but I didn't know what the signs were that he had an onset of schizophrenia. So better education to the public. And the red flag law is an attempt, but it's probably not the absolute answer.
We talked briefly about you getting your doctorate in psychology. What have you learned since going through that program? And I guess what was your dissertation on?
I have learned so much about mental health. And again, this is psychology. It's not like, oh, what do your dreams mean? This is about what motivates a person to behave the way they do, including personality disorders, psychosis, psychopathy, things like that. So I watch things on the news or at the police department and I say, well, that's very clearly, like the gentleman that killed his nephew, clearly he has schizophrenia. You could tell when they brought him in by the way he's sitting and he's slouching and his speech and lack of eye contact. Things that I think allow me to contribute more, saying this is how we have to deal with this person, or this is how we should deal with this person. You can't just put them in general population, that type of thing. My dissertation was a little bit different, and that came from my training background. And it was a phenomenological study about why police officers don't like to implement new software. And basically it boiled down to the same thing I said before. Cops don't just want new software programs unless it's actionable. Say, oh, well, you have to get in this database and do this search. I'm not going to do it unless it gives me something I can go arrest a guy with. So whether it be like leads online, aha, this bad guy pawned what I was looking for, I can go get him. But anything that's just out there as fluff is not going to be utilized by police.
I learned that some the hard way in my career. And even everything they want either on that cell phone or in the car, right?
Yes.
If it's not in the MDC, if it's not part of what they can do from the car, good luck getting it implemented, because it's just not going to happen.
Right.
I guess one last thing just to finish up the instructor portion is, do you have any advice for analysts and tips and trips? What's your normal advice that you give to your students?
I would say beyond the training of them and taking the courses, my actual tip is the networking. I used to find it silly when people say, well, the best part of a conference is the networking. I'm like, oh, you mean like drinking beer? No, it's actually making the contacts that you're going to use for the rest of your life. Like I mentioned, Mike Winslow, we met in a class a long time ago. He's still one of my best friends, and he's a go-to for me if it involves cell phones. So the networking, knowing the people, is absolutely important.
I actually want to take advantage of your general knowledge and experiences with working with so many different police departments throughout the country and all the different training that you've put on. You've gotten experience and to be on hand to see so many different police departments throughout the country. So I want to just get your perspective on a couple of topics to see what you think is the cream of the crop. The first one I want to know is, you have worked with several different RMSs: Tiburon, Intergraph, Spielman, New World, HTE, OSSI, Vision, Logistics, even Motorola. Who has the best RMS when it comes to the perspective of law enforcement analysis?
So there's two sides to this story. There's the officer's experience with the front end, and then there's the analyst experience, which in my opinion should be with the back end. And like the RMS that I had at Broomfield was New World. I couldn't tell you the first thing about how to run a query in the front end. What I always did was immediately use an ODBC connection and SQL to get my data out of the tables on the back end. When you're looking at the back end of an RMS, they are almost all identical. They all are named in a very sensical way, all the tables that mean something, and you just have to know where to go to get the data. One thing that PDs and sheriffs are famous for is changing an RMS and then complaining that they like the old one better. Well, that's because obviously they're having to learn something new, but they're like, but what about this? What about that? Well, if you bypass all of that, like I said, just look at the tables in the background, they're basically the same. So one of the most straightforward, easy to use as far as the tables RMSs is Tiburon. And I had that at Will County Sheriff. I have it at Jefferson County Sheriff, and it's just a very straightforward RMS. Now, having said that, there is no perfect RMS out there. And I used to joke with Sean Bear, because he wrote software so beautifully, and he had been an analyst and he'd been a police officer, that he should write from that perspective his own RMS, to which he said, oh yeah, I did.
Yeah, of course.
Right, of course he did in his spare time. But yeah, my advice about that is learn the back end of your RMS and how to connect directly to your data instead of trying to finagle with those front end weird queries that they each seem to have.
I couldn't agree more in terms of that's where SQL normally comes in for those that might see and hear us talking about SQL. Why would I want to learn a programming language or why would I want to do that? Because you're not limited by what's on the front end. The RMS can't possibly on the front end give you every single field that's in the back end. When you have access to the back end in SQL, you're asking the question that you want, and you're getting access to the specific, every single bit of data you have access to.
Yes, because you don't know what the front end is actually asking. And so if you run a back end query and say, oh, we had 750 speeding tickets this year, and then you have some commander come up and say, well, I did a poll and I show we only had 712. Well, you don't know what the front end actually asked. It probably said that wasn't on a dirt road or some other criteria. So when the criteria is based purely on what you're asking, then you're in control of the data.
From my point of view, what the RMS should be doing for analysts is getting report requests down, because the folks shouldn't be coming to you for reports. They should be getting it straight up from the RMS, and especially if it's something they're asking for on a weekly or regular basis.
Right.
That's not something that analysts should be report producers. The other question I wanted to ask you is, what is the top law enforcement analyst unit in the United States?
Okay, so this is tricky because a lot of places have great units. But in me having spent time at different agencies and even different regions, you definitely see different strengths in the country. Of course, one of the top areas is the Scottsdale area. That's where Mike Winslow is from, Mary Berticelli, Brittany Willis. That, in my opinion, started that strongly because, and Sean's probably going to roll his eyes at this, but Sean came from Tempe PD, and he was one of the godfathers of crime analysis. So it became an emphasis for him and his personal mission to get that area rolling. So both Tempe PD, Scottsdale, that entire area is just a mecca of crime analysis. They have wonderful people working down there. Secondly, I would definitely give a shout out to Dallas. They have obviously a history of people that have worked for them that are wonderful, but they have a huge unit of 30 people, 40 people that all they're doing is data analysis, and they are always seeking training. They're seeking the most up-to-date software. And they started with, if you know Mark Stallo, somebody who is also very passionate about the career path. So Dallas is doing wonderful. The third that I would say, also kind of a region, would be Northern New York State, but especially Rochester. Again, they have an amazing unit. The last time I was there, they had at least 10 analysts, and the analysts are seen in that police department as just 100% part of the team. They have their own sworn supervisor that says, this is what we're doing. We're a unit together. And I was very impressed in the time I spent there.
So you define that by the people. What have these units done, do you think, that got these people together? I don't think it's just that they were born there. Like people, you're just not born in Dallas or born in Rochester, and that's just how you're raised, kind of thing. Right. So what did these units do to produce and attract, develop these great analysts?
I think that one thing they all have done, of course, there's people that stand out to me from each of these agencies, right? Chris Delaney, who now works for Esri, is from Rochester. When he was there, he took that unit very seriously. He brought in training. He made sure that there was buy-in at the police department. Same with Dallas, same with the Tempe Scottsdale area. They put the unit first. They strive for something larger, not just we have an analyst, show up for work, but they want to do more. I mean, Scottsdale, Mary Berticelli is the IACA president right now. She has always been driving training and helping analysts get to the next level. And I think that's really what it takes, is that motivation.
I'd be kind of curious to look at their hiring practices and how it compares. And then look at salaries and what's driving these, because it's obvious that it sounds like these departments have made the effort to put analysis first, or at the forefront at least, and to take it very seriously and to build a structure in which the analysts are part of the team. Yes. But it just, to me, their hiring practices and their it's a culture thing, right? There's got to be something there. Right. I mean, what do you think it is, other than some of the stuff that we've already hit in terms of they've developed this culture?
Well, after the culture has been developed and some of the leaders go on to do even bigger and better things, like whether it be like Mary being the president, it's your reputation. Your agency develops a reputation. So like in the Denver area, we all know the agencies that love to work hand in hand, and we know the ones that don't. And so when you say, okay, I'm going to reach out to Wheat Ridge because they have an awesome analyst, Beth, and she's going to help me, and it happens, then they get that reputation that their analyst is awesome. And so the next people coming on board say, oh, wow, Wheat Ridge, that's a cool agency. And it just continues from there.
It's a fascinating topic, really.
Yeah, it is.
And just to see, because I don't think it's really asked, it's not even pursued, what is considered the top units in the country. Thank you for not being wishy-washy. And thank you for giving me specific 3, because I think it's definitely an interesting perspective.
Thank you.
I guess one last question that I have on your career, and it's actually outside of law enforcement. It's what might be your first job ever, is that you were a bank vault manager.
Yeah.
And I was wanting to know, you were a bank vault manager for 7 years. So my question to you is, what does Hollywood get wrong about bank robberies and bank heists?
A, they don't happen very often. B, they don't come in with guns ablazing. The thing that I learned, because that was my college job, was working at a bank, is that don't accidentally pull that bait money, because the cops show up. Yeah, they are pretty rare these days, bank robberies. But the last one that I worked on, the guy walked in, of course, didn't even have a weapon, demanded money, got a lot of it. And there were 2 people inside the bank with concealed weapons permits that were too afraid, which I would be too, to pull their weapon. So it's definitely a crime of fear. It's not a crime of opportunity or going in with your guns.
We didn't spend too much time on your personal interests, but I know you like to travel and you like to go to the beach and cook, and obviously spend time with your 2 kids. Do you have a favorite beach or a favorite destination in terms of a beach, or is there just what's the characteristics of a good beach, maybe, if you can't have trouble pinpointing it?
So I love the Caribbean, and it's because the beaches are white sand and clear water, and that's my criteria. I love other beaches for like a day or 2, but somewhere I keep going back to is the Caribbean. I absolutely love it. I'm halfway torn between a beach person and a mountain person. I went rafting yesterday, and it was also fun, but every year we make it to some sunny beach at least once.
In terms of cooking, what are some of your favorite dishes or favorite things to cook?
Well, the problem I have is that I always go back to my go-tos, which is like enchiladas, and I love cooking a good steak. So one of my nerdy habits on the weekends is to bust out my cookbooks. I can't believe I'm admitting this, and just go through the cookbooks and read and find something new, write down the ingredients or take a snapshot on my phone and go get the ingredients and try it at least once.
My wife and I recently were talking about dishes that we would always see at like a potluck. Like if we were, as a kid, like if we were going to church or we were going to some potluck thing, there was these standard dishes. We're both from Pennsylvania, so they're mainly Pennsylvania themed. She actually has a cookbook from her family, and there's a salad section in the cookbook, and it doesn't have any vegetables in it. It's like macaroni salad or potato salad or Waldorf salad. It's all these salads, but it's like maybe 5% vegetables, maybe.
Oh, that's funny.
Do you have any of those in terms of your childhood that comes to mind for cooking?
Yeah. Most of the stuff from my childhood is written down on a piece of paper from my mom, and I just have it stuffed in with my cookbooks. But one thing that we made every year was Christmas, because our family's German, and so there's certain German recipes that we just try to pass on to our kids, and one's called crinkle cake, and I don't know if it's actually called that or if our family just named it that, but it's dough that takes 2 days to make, and then you roll it out like a strudel, and you put brown sugar and cinnamon and butter and pecans and all these yummies inside, and then fold it up like a strudel and bake it.
Nice.
And I should just know by now how to make it, but I still bust out the little pieces of paper from my mom where she wrote it down.
Well, that's awesome. For the last segment, then, is the words of the world, and I give the guest the last word. So you can promote any idea that you want. So, Sally, what are your words to the world?
I would say, whether it be within your region, your state, your country, or international, you need to find a way to meet the other analysts, get to know them, and use each other as resources and act as a team. It really has proven to me to be the most valuable thing in my career is knowing people all over the world that have different talents and different strengths.
Very good. Well, I leave everybody with you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later, but I do appreciate your time today. Thank you so much, Sally, for being on the program, and you be safe.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you for joining us today on Analyst Talk with Jason Alder. We hope you not only enjoyed the show, but also learned something new. For more information on our guests and information relating to today's topic, please visit our website at leapodcast.com. Special thanks to the Rough and Tumble for our theme song. For more of their music, you can visit their website at theroughandtumble.com. Also thanks to Kyle McMullen for our show logo. For more of his design, please visit his website at moderntype.com. The show is hosted, recorded, and edited by Jason Elder and written by me, Mindy. You can contact us both via the LEA Podcast website. Please join us again next time as we interview another expert in this great field.